Excellent. Well, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us here in this bonus reel segment with Dr. Thorsten Wuest from West Virginia University, talking about smart manufacturing and its role in the supply chain resiliency. Thorsten, let's just jump right back into it. You closed the last session by stating that smart manufacturing is not bought, it's earned, which I think is brilliant. So let's start with that conversation and how it ties in with the business strategy choice cascade that we want to talk about here.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, because when smart manufacturing could be bought, well, it's just money then, right? But when you have to earn it, it's sweat, tears, and failure, and you want to make sure that you invest your resources right. And to do that, you cannot just buy a robot and have the CEO shake hands with it because it looks good on pictures. Then it's bought, and you can have the marketing bill for it, right? But when you really want to create impact, you have to make sure that it aligns with your individual organizations or your supply network structure, goals, visions, ambitions, and also capabilities. Because smart manufacturing is broad, as we all know. Like it goes from the pure technology, like how to install the sensors, how to measure data, to what to do with the data, how to apply the insights and improve the process, which all take a lot of expertise, time, and resources, and they are limited. We all know that. So you want to make sure to align your strategy and your smart manufacturing journey with what is most impactful. And
now,
please go ahead, Conrad.
Don't finish your thought there, John.
No, I guess that's a good point. With the most impactful,
Yeah.
with most impactful actions. Yeah.
Yeah. So how I'm looking at these questions and this cascade you have here, and I love the questions in general, but I'm wondering in today's environment, really, you have here in the center, how will we win? But I think most people are asking themselves, how will we survive? So I'm wondering if you see this cascade a little different these days than when you published the book.
No, I do not. And when we think of, again, evolutionary process, and this time in a broader perspective, evolutionary in a Darwinian sense, surviving is winning. Survival of the fittest, right? So the fittest is winning the evolutionary race. And in this environment, you're right. Like winning is surviving. It's not like increasing your revenue or something, or having a record quarter. Some companies probably will think that, and kudos to them. But for the majority, it's like, hey, how can we ensure that we survive for the next year and can pay our employees and prepare for the future? And that's a win. In this sense, you can interpret win in different ways.
That's great. That's a great perspective on that. And on the how will we configure, I love that question also. And these days, a lot of companies had to reconfigure and adapt. So how is that manifested in the digital supply chain?
Well, I guess that's a very broad question, and the configuring depends really on what you aspire to do. Of what short-term necessities companies had to adapt to. We saw that Ford and Amazon and so on all of a sudden used, tracking technology and wearable devices to collect data on who's interacting with whom, how to remotely access shop floor machine tools. Jumping basically ahead of what they had planned to do in the digital transformation stage. But when you think of this configuration, which in this sense was a necessity to reopen, did they plan that long term and see like, okay, after hopefully we get through this, how would that align with our long-term goals? Like remote access to machine tools, great. It in the short term, it reduces the amount of people that interact on the shop floor and allows us to separate. But in the long run, it has much more implications, because all of a sudden you have this pipeline, the connectivity of the machine tool, that allows for a lot of higher level applications, transforming your business.
Yeah, you also have disruption of how those systems are historically sold and delivered, and the people that are servicing them, and now they don't have access, right? And so we certainly have new new dimensions, right, to deal with, and acceleration. I mean, you mentioned in the previous session about whether the pandemic is, helps the point of emphasizing the point of the book or not. And I certainly think that it does. I mean, from from an importance perspective, and the fact that we're even having the next session focused on the national dialogue on supply chain resiliency, because people are saying what we were thinking previously was a nice to have, is now essential for us, right? So,
and then let me jump right in there. I couldn't agree more, and that's probably the evolutionary point again. Companies were thinking about all these things, but they thought they had more time, because it was more a matter of improving, of long-term strategic alignment, which is great that they had that, but it was not a short-term necessity. And let me give you an example of a project we had the last few years with a machine tool manufacturer who had problems in the sense of their maintenance, that they had to send their technicians all over the country to remote locations to basically look at a PLC and see the error code, drive back and figure out which part to bring, and go there again. And it was 8-hour flight drives to the middle of nowhere in Central America, or in the Midwest. They're located here in PA. And they wanted to have connectivity to basically, in one sense, just to read out the error code of the PLC, basically have access to the PLC provided data, which is not revolutionary, if we agree on that, right? But in a sense of COVID, all of a sudden, it is a necessity, because you cannot send somebody, because there are no planes, and they have travel restrictions. You have to go to quarantine when you go to a different state. So it's not optional. It's not a nice to have to save travel money or resources. You can, otherwise the production shuts down, because you cannot fix your machine tool, and your customer is very unhappy. So that perspective changed a little. And
now, as much as we've made progress in these areas, there's still ways to go. And actually, in the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about that and some of the initiatives CESMII is involved, because we have found gaps, right? This pandemic, and there's been disruptions before, but this one is very significant, and I think it's really increased awareness. And I think now there's a recognition that there's a gap, that there's maybe a need for a national network to handle, at that level, handle some supply chain issues that are not easily solved among private companies working together. I mean, they could, or at least they can be accelerated.
yeah, no, that's key.
yeah, well, and we'll talk more. I'm sure we'll talk in the follow-on webcast with CESMII CEO about new legislation that's been put on the floor of Congress that talks about that, putting the infrastructure in place and putting the task force from a supply chain perspective to handle this from a national perspective, because it's an issue of national security and national prosperity. So
and the one point that we probably didn't get to touch too much on in the previous cast is, like, today, or until this recent interruptions, a lot of supply chains were really focused on efficiency and reducing the cost delay and optimizing it towards efficiency, basically, which makes a lot of sense in regular operation, because you want to reduce the waste of resources, right? But having this interruption and seeing the impact of it on the PPE side, that could cost people's lives, and on the convenience side, people don't have enough toilet paper. On the home front, not having garlic or yeast, like we probably have to have that conversation. What is essential and what is it worth of our supply network model? Is it only efficiency, or do we also have to have a resilience factor in there, which already, I mean, the discussion is going on. There's a reason why we have that webcast right now. But are these the only factors that we need to think about, or are there probably a national security factor? I don't know, like things like that.
Well, so you guys know the supply chain side of things better than I do. I'm just an old manufacturing guy. I mean, in our
You work in automotive. You probably know supply chain to an extent that we can't even dream of.
To be honest with me, it provided a grounding and a clarity for me, because we were literally getting orders every 29 seconds to send a custom configured, instrument panel or seat set or cockpit, whatever it was, on time, in sequence, and very little room for error. And we were able to handle that, right? And if you take the concept of that, this order's coming in, it happens to be from outside of our business, and then we have to build it and ship it and get it where it needs to be in the right place at the right time. It doesn't matter if that's internal to my business or external to my business, right? There's a demand signal that says go, and we go, and we do what we got to do. And so this idea, right in the middle, you have competing on speed, agility, service, cost, quality. Man, that's our sweet spot, right? I mean, from a manufacturing perspective, manufacturing solutions perspective, we've been talking about this for decades, right? And people do it. They bring value there. But my question of sort of expanding out, and less about spanning out through the supply chain from like factory to factory, more about spanning out from the plant environment into the supply chain operations. One of the things that we still see is that there's a struggle from an alignment perspective of, say, cascading all of the goals of the business strategically down into how the manufacturers are compensating their people in the plants, and whether they have visibility into the impact of speed and agility, et cetera, to that top line strategy. Is it different on the supply chain side? Is there better alignment and the supply chain teams have their act better together? Or what's the level, your guys' thoughts on whether there's more of that sort of process and organizational kind of challenge on that side as well? Any thoughts?
Yes. One thing that I just noticed here, and what comes back to Conrad, so I will answer that first, is here when you say speed, agility, service, cost, quality. Now with the interruption, we would probably add a few question marks here: resiliency and safety and trust, something like that. So we might have to add a few notions there. So that just brought me back to that when you mentioned that. On the other side, and again, in the author team, we have a diversity of backgrounds. My background is also manufacturing, so I might not represent the supply chain holistic perspective as good as you just assumed I could. And one thing that I would like to mention is, coming from the automotive industry, you're biased in a sense that you probably saw a very highly integrated, well-developed, optimized supply chain. My limited exposure here with Mercedes in Germany was they even figured out the bullwhip effect to the extent that they connected all the ERP systems and other planning tools, which is great, but it's also very fragile, because of course they force their suppliers to use the same systems, use the same APIs, which are agreed upon either by the OEM or by the automotive industry. But now we're talking like of agile supply networks where the configuration might change. So it's not always the third tier supplier supplying to Bosch and Bosch supplying to ZF and ZF to Mercedes, who then integrate it just in time. Great. I mean, that of course you can optimize a model that stays the same to an extent that is not possible with a more agile and one-of-a-kind production model. But I think our goal and vision should be to try to get as close to an optimized supply chain like we see in automotive across the board and across industries. And for that we need standards, and non-OEM influenced entities like CESMII are probably key to leverage that and make sure that the little guys, the SMEs, are protected and their interests are reflected, and not trumped by the big boys who just have the resources and the political power to say, hey, we want you to send an invoice in that format because it corresponds with our requirements. I don't care how you do it. It's your problem. It should be a conversation saying, like, what's the best way to do it and what's the common denominator. And that's idealistic. I'm an academic, so I can make these requests and have others figure it out, right?
Well, and that's what we think. That's why we think we're here, right? I mean, because those are things, to your point, you know, with my background, yeah, there was some optimization and some very exceptional examples of how things were done. But there are also a lot of things that were done through contracts and brute force. And just like you said, we're all going to be on the same systems. And that's how we're going to ensure interoperability and that kind of stuff.
So, Thorsten, I wanted to make sure that we asked this question that came in on the prior session, but we want to get from you, what are your top recommendations? So if I want to move more towards a digital supply network, implement these intelligent supply processes, what are your top recommendations for moving forward?
Read the book, obviously. No, joking aside, that's a good question, and I guess this reflects mostly my own view here. Is align your long-term and short-term thinking, because while you might want to plan long-term to say, okay, we are okay with not making any impact in the next year, but we plan 5 years, that's fine. But you need to get some wins to your folks working on these projects and show them why it's important, how it improves their daily operational lives. So that's the side of what to invest in and how to select projects. Select projects that ideally have a short-term win, but also have an impact long-term and align with your strategy. That it's not like islands that are disconnected and have solve little problems, but select the islands that solve little problems, but combine to solving a bigger issue for your company, making your company better. That's a little philosophical. On the supply network side is choose your partners wisely, especially at the beginning, because having the wrong partner that basically just tries to consume and to use you, that happens. I mean, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, right? So choose partners that you trust, even so they might not be, you know, the 1 cent cheaper per part. Choose somebody that you know you can rely on, that is willing to understand or is willing to go the extra mile to understand what you would need, what you want. And is also open to adapt their own processes to align with yours for the greater good in the supply network. And I'm very aware that that's not easy, and I have no solution how to figure that out. But I believe it's crucial to figure that out, how to partner up and how to make it mutually beneficial.
Excellent.
Well, CESMII is the place where we're figuring this out. So
I know we're hoping to have our project soon to do that, right?
So it's great that we don't have it all figured out. We still have things to figure out, and I'll take this opportunity to invite people to join this community and this conversation.
I can only echo that. It's a great community, great conversations happening, and yeah, there's a lot of open questions, and that's a great place to figure them out.
Well, and I think to tie in with the discussion that we've had here and about the timeliness and, you know, the realities that we're living in and such, even getting involved with an organization like CESMII is one of those things that a lot of organizations don't have time to do, right? Or it's another thing to add to the plate, right? But when you look at the importance of, if you truly think, go back to Conrad's first point, if winning equals survival, then you got to have a stake in figuring out how to move forward. And there are these boundaries and these barriers, a lot of things we've talked about already as far as trust, data ownership, right? Willingness to share. Those are sort of things that can be worked out, but they can't be worked out individually. Now you take an example like you talked about, Thorsten, where you have a huge automotive OEM and huge suppliers, right? And they make agreements and they, you know, come together and say, all right, well, here's a solution for us. Well, that's one thing, but for the masses, for everybody else to have a way to be resilient, that's not going to happen if we don't work together. And a lot of the things that need to change are not so much technological as they are behavioral, organizational, those sorts of things. So I agree with you, Conrad.
And tying back into that again with the last statement I made in the the previous part of this cast, that smart manufacturing cannot be bought, but has to be earned. Joining CESMII is a part of earning it, because you understand how the data models are set up, how you have a voice in saying like, hey, in our industry, this is crucial. When you just buy off-the-shelf software, you probably overpay for what you get, because it's not aligned with your requirements, or you have to pay a third-party service provider. I don't want to say the word, but a lot of money to align it with your resources, and then have a maintenance fee every year. With CESMII, you have a say in how it's developed. You understand the data models and how it's created, and then you have basically a say in it, and you have built capabilities within your organizations with the people involved in it that have an understanding of it, and you can save the contract to the third-party provider, because your people are qualified to work on it themselves. And that's the new oil, probably, the capabilities, the human ingenuities that you build in your organization.
Excellent, gentlemen. Well, I think we got to spend the time that we wanted to on this discussion. We got to answer the question that was asked in the last time. So I'm pretty happy that, Thorsten, first of all, we wanted to use this conversation with you to sort of set the stage again for that national conversation that CESMII is a part of. So we really think that it's timely, and that your content is great, and that the work that you're doing is fantastic. So appreciate that. I don't have anything else to add at this point, or ask at this point. I don't know if either of you have anything you want to make sure we cover.
Well, I want to thank Thor, and really, we folks, there's a lot of information in that book. Seriously, we just scratched the surface on a couple of points, and gave you a taste. But there's highly recommend reading that material.
Thank you very much, you guys. No, it was a pleasure, and I guess we could have continued that for hours on, but we do that next time we can travel again, right? And do it in person.
Do it in person. You got it. Excellent.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and have yourself a great day.
Yeah,
that's it. Bye.
Bye, guys.